Hi, I'm Kara Goldin, and I'm the founder and CEO of Hint, best known for its unsweetened flavored water, and also the Wall Street Journal and Amazon best-selling author of Undaunted, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. And I'm here today on the From the Heart podcast. I'm very excited to be here.
Kara, thank you so much. It's great to see you and meet you. We've connected and we've emailed and text messaged, and I've been, we're both reaching for our bottle of Hint water right now as we speak. Become
Exactly.
fans right away. So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. Can you tell me and tell our audience just a little bit about yourself, where you are and how, I guess we'll get right into just the origins of Hint itself, because the success of the company is what's led into now the book and the podcast and everything else. So I'd love to hear kind of the why behind Hint Water.
Yeah, so I live up in the Bay Area in San Francisco, just outside of San Francisco in Marin County, and I started my company just a little over 15 years ago now. I can't even believe it. And I did it really out of this problem that I saw that I was having around health. So I had gained a bunch of weight over the course of 3 pregnancies at that point. I have 4 kids now, but for me, it was not just the weight, it was also my energy levels, my skin had developed terrible adult acne, which I didn't even have as a teenager, and I just didn't feel like myself. And so when I figured out, I was looking at all the things that I was eating, and that seemed relatively okay, after, spending a little bit of time on that. But one day I had this diet soda, Diet Coke in particular, that was sitting right in front of me in my kitchen. And I happened to look down at the label, the ingredients label. And I don't think I ever read an ingredient label. I had started, a few weeks before then, really looking at the food, but I had never read what I had been drinking. And I sort of joked, I thought, gosh, I probably care more about what I'm putting in my car than I do my own body. I just never had really made that connection. And again, I didn't know if it was going to work, but I had been going through this process of elimination just to try and get to the heart of it.
Hey,
and
look at that.
I know, look at that. And that's when I said, I'm just not going to drink this for a couple of weeks, this Diet Coke, and see what will happen, and put it to the side and just continued, really started drinking plain water because I was super thirsty. And then I started asking myself why I didn't drink water more often. And the answer was clear. It was boring. It
Doesn't
didn't
taste
have,
good. Yeah.
yeah,
Doesn't have that
yeah,
flavor
it
that we
didn't
like.
taste bad, but it
Right.
just was like, oh, it's so boring. So I started slicing up fruit and throwing it in the water and thinking that's really all I need. And about 2.5 weeks into living this way and really not changing anything in the food that I was eating, but just giving up my Diet Coke, that's when I lost 24 pounds in 2.5 weeks. I had all my skin issues had cleared up, and my energy levels went significantly higher. And that's when I really was like, gosh, this is so interesting how I had really been kind of tricked and fooled and marketed to, believed that diet actually equated to health. And I looked around at, the diet soda industry as a whole and the soda industry too. But again, looking at diet, I just had no idea how big it was and how, probably there's a lot of other people that are fooled that really think of it as healthy. And so that's when I went grocery shopping. This new store, Whole Foods, had just opened in San Francisco Bay Area. And I figured there has to be a ready to drink product that just has fruit and water. And I didn't have anything against carbonation, but really didn't want to have the carbonation because I
You're
felt like,
starting to look at labels now and you're realizing I don't want all those preservatives and all that other saccharin and other stuff in there
yeah.
that, yeah.
But also with the carbonated waters, there were some carbonated waters that had fruit in them. They had a lot more sodium in them, but the key thing was I thought if I'm going to drink 8 glasses of water a day, like all those bubbles, I'm just not going to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So that's when I just I was shocked, and probably another 6 months, I looked around at other stores. I couldn't find this product that was still water, no sweeteners at all, with fruit in it. And I thought, gosh, maybe while I'm just trying to figure out what I'm ultimately going to do, maybe I should try and get a product on the shelf at Whole Foods. I just thought it'd be really fun and
Yeah.
kind of interesting. And I don't know, it would, I think I was also going through this period of time where prior to launching Hint, I was a tech executive, and I was with a company called America Online that many
Heard
of
of
you are
it.
probably
Yeah.
familiar with.
Yeah.
And I was there very early on, and was actually with a startup prior to that that was a Steve Jobs idea that was at Apple. And I didn't work for Apple or Steve Jobs, but I worked for the startup that actually had spun out of a project at Apple, and worked with these four guys who had worked at Apple. And I was hired in to run their business development and deal with their product was essentially retailers, putting retailers on a CD, on a disc. And Steve Jobs' idea was, if you could put all the graphics onto a disc and tell the consumer to insert the disc into the machine, this is in
Hmm.
the mid 90s, that it wouldn't matter what the speed of the internet was. And so I had read about this idea in the Wall Street Journal, and I had been following Steve for years, ever since college. I just thought
Right.
he's way ahead of it, but he's so interesting. And so that's when I just thought, when I moved to Silicon Valley from New York, I thought, gosh, it'd be really cool just to, you know, go and talk to these people who are doing this, if they will talk to me. I just wasn't afraid to sort of cold call them and see if they would. And then they ended up hiring me.
Hmm.
America Online was an investor. They acquired us. And suddenly I'm running this team of people that is basically charged with doing e-commerce and what is now known, I guess, as direct to consumer.
Sure.
So I'm leading this effort. Nobody ever thought it was going to be, big. It ended up to be $1 billion in revenue to AOL by the time, by the end of year 7. And that's when I decided that it was ready, or it was time for me to kind of go back to San Francisco. I've been commuting to DC and really all over the US. I was traveling like crazy. And at some point I, was able to have 3 children
Got to
along the
grow
way.
roots
But
somewhere, right?
yeah,
Sure. Yeah.
but I just felt like, for me, it was, it was really kind of a life decision too, that I felt like I really wanted to see my kids when they were young. They had 4 kids under the age of, excuse me, 3 kids under the age of 4. And I wanted to watch them kind of grow up. But
Sure.
after a couple of years, I was getting itchy. I lived in Silicon Valley. I had a lot of friends in tech. So I kept thinking that I really wanted, or it made the most sense, I should say,
Yeah.
for me to go into tech. But I talk a lot about, really kind of the feelings that I had back then, which unfortunately I couldn't really articulate at the time. But I think that the key thing that I really felt like I was missing was this learning piece, especially towards the end of my tenure with AOL, that I had been on this, huge hockey stick with AOL and huge growth in the 90s. And then by the end of kind of year 7, it naturally kind of slowed down,
Sure.
and there wasn't, sort of this crazy growth thing that was going on. And instead I was managing a couple hundred people all over the US, and, doing, before even a pandemic where people were
Sure.
working virtually, I was used to doing that. But I felt like the key thing that I was missing personally was this thing that now I look at as really a human need, which is just this ability to be kind of educated, no matter what your level is. When you get
Hmm.
to be a manager today, it seems like you're less in a role of learning and more in a role of managing, and of, helping people, signing off on things. And it
Yeah.
just continues to decrease as you go higher up on the chain. And what I really um, sort of counsel people and guide people in as their career grows is never stop learning,
Sure.
because that's something that I think is really the key to happiness, and certainly the what I've seen in really successful people who are truly happy is that they're always learning. And anyway, the long and short of it is that when I had this problem around health and I saw this need, and I had identified this problem but also had an idea on how to fix it, I think that that was just so exciting for me, because suddenly I'm in this very uncomfortable place where it was very scary. I was no longer the expert, I was the student, right?
Now the time to learn, as you're talking about.
Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Sure.
So it was, so I think that so the combination of really the importance of health kind of cropping up in my own
Yeah.
life, and really wanting to go and do something with it, but then also this craving for really wanting to learn. And I mean, call it the stupidest one in the room, right? Or whatever you want to, I really wanted to learn. And I think that was also, I knew a lot and I
Mhm.
had been successful in my other roles, but I think that this was an industry that I still look around and say, this is crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, there was no rule book. There was no, it was, I remember asking early on, I not only wanted to produce a product using real fruit, but one that had no preservatives in it. And so finally, when I got to somebody who would co-pack the product and make it, I kept saying, I don't want to have a product with preservatives in it. And they would say, well, we can't do
How
that.
you gonna
And I,
ship it and have it sit on a shelf and sit in someone's pantry for a month before they
well,
drink it, right?
exactly. But
Yeah.
but the answer was we can't. And I would say, why? And in some ways I had permission to say why, because they
You
would
didn't know.
also,
They also knew you didn't know, right?
right. Well, they would
Yeah.
size me up
Mhm.
because they'd say, "Oh, did you, used to work at Pepsi?" Or, I mean,
Right.
what drove you to do
Yeah.
this? And I would share with them about my story. And some people were like, there's the door. I don't think this is going to go anywhere. Hence the subtitle of my book, The Doubters,
Right.
right? I already had my own doubts, but suddenly they're sharing how they thought I wasn't going to be able to be successful. But in addition to that, what I found was, because I didn't have the experience and I was asking why, they saw that I was just curious. And sadly, I would say greater than 50% of those people who would say no would just would really look at would look at what I was asking, and not be interested, not be curious to ultimately go and try and solve that problem. But a few of them would be like, oh, I don't know the answer to that. And then
Yeah.
I would go, I would continue going on. So I think it was actually a benefit
Sure.
coming from a different industry, because I guess if I would have worked in beverage, right,
Yeah. Or
they
if you
would
were a
think,
grad student and you were there to do a research
yeah.
project, obviously a lot of people want to share their story because they want to help and mentor. Let me take you back for just 1 second. So I stopped drinking soda about 3.5 years ago, very similar health issues, and just didn't feel good with all the diet soda I was drinking, same as what you said.
Mhm.
Um, So I started just drinking water, and I'll still drink a lot of water, but like you, it's like you just got to have some taste from time to time. And that's
Mhm.
millions of people's story right there. So let me go back to a term I've heard you talk about in your book and other interviews and on your podcast. You use the term accidental entrepreneur. Talk to me about, so not all of us got sick of drinking soda and started drinking water and then started a $150 million company. You did. What was that process of where you thought, okay, I'm slicing fruit and throwing it into the water in my kitchen and it tastes good, to where you thought, this could be more than just me. This
Yeah.
could be a company. Tell us about that.
Well, I call myself an accidental entrepreneur because I wasn't the person that always knew I would be an entrepreneur or
Right.
start a company, and certainly not a beverage company. I had started out in media, and as I mentioned before, went into tech, and then had this idea based on my own health issues that I was trying to solve. But for me, I think it was, it was just a lot of little trials along the
Hmm.
way. Again, I wasn't thinking of it as a company. I was slicing up fruit to
Right.
satisfy myself. But but it's interesting. I think about when I moved from New York to Silicon Valley and ended up really stumbling upon this startup that I mentioned, that after I had been following Steve Jobs and some of his stuff that he was doing for years. I think that's when I really realized, like, it was such a different culture and such a different environment than what I was used to working at in New
Sure.
York. I started out at Time. It was very buttoned up. It was very Ivy League. I was not an Ivy League student. And then I worked for kind of a startup, but a little bit later, startup at CNN. And so I feel like my entire journey kind of, now when you look back, now it makes total sense that I was getting this education in
Sure.
uh, different stage
We can see
startups.
the steps that led us here when we're looking back, but it's hard to see the steps going
Totally.
forward. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. But when I moved out to Silicon Valley, and there's four guys, we weren't in a garage, but I mean, it was a tiny office that was pathetic. I mean, on so many fronts, but the fact that ideas came from anywhere, we'd order pizza for lunch, everybody was
Hmm.
sharing. It was kind of
Sure.
like, are there any plates around? Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it was chaotic versus what I was accustomed to. And what I found was I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
And I was sort of digging it, but I also felt like un very different from the situation I had been in New York. The uh, uh, the concept of ideas coming from everywhere, anywhere, was really, really new to me. And how how they didn't have it figured out. And even when I got to AOL, and it wasn't a brand new startup when they acquired us, um, they were, I mean, they were adding thousands of people a week
Hmm.
to the organization. So seeing a company go through hyper growth is something that I've also mentioned to so many entrepreneurs. It's hard to describe it, what
Yeah.
happens, one day when you're in an office, you in San Francisco, and then you go back to Virginia where it was just all these people getting added. It's chaos. I mean, half the time people are just so focused on just trying to, like, say hi. There's just a lot of new people constantly, and that has its own issues. But again, I feel like I had seen so many different things
Sure.
along the way that I also maybe even got kind of a burst of confidence a little bit, to know that nobody really knows what they're doing. And like in these startups, in terms of forming it, forming the culture, it starts with the founder and the vision and the
Sure.
problem. And so I think I had a lot of those. I think it was the perfect background to be able to start my own company, but certainly didn't think it was going to be the case.
What has surprised you? And you said it's been 15 years, and at the beginning, wow, it's been 15 years, which probably feels like a lifetime some mornings and like just yesterday, other days. Has anything surprised you about the popularity and the success of Hint? I mean, obviously, I'm guessing a lot of the people who drink it, like myself, and how you started, is like, we just want an alternative. But is there anything that you've looked back at? Wow, I did not see that coming.
It's something I think about this year on a lot of, not just as far as Hint or
Sure.
as the industry as a whole, but I feel like the pandemic has really sped up a lot of industries. And I think health
Mhm.
is one that is much more top of mind for people today
Sure.
who are, really not wanting to be exposed, right, to this crazy virus.
Yeah.
And I think that, gosh, I would say 15 years ago when I started this company, I mean, I had the fast early adopters who were buying our product at Whole Foods. We had a email on our bottle and an 800 number,
Hmm.
which we still do today. And that was, I mean, I had never done that before on a product where I'd call or email. And I mean, day one of selling at Whole Foods, consumers were like, where have you been? This is
Yeah.
amazing.
How do I get more of this now?
How do I get more of this? And so we had some of those people, but not a lot, but we had some. And I thought, gosh, the fact that they're actually taking that extra action, we probably have 10 times more, right?
Yeah.
That just didn't go to the effort to do this. And so for me, I had these people that were giving me early feedback, and I just thought immediately I have to find out where all those people are. But we've continued to grow through the years, and we've never had a down year in sales. I mean, we've continued to grow, but this year, I mean, it's our hockey stick.
Sure.
And it's crazy. And, the fact that I think we've been really fortunate, because the fact that during a pandemic, we're an essential product. And so that's
sold at an
something.
essential store, because all the grocery stores are booming for the most part. So
Yeah, I mean, yes, the problem with grocery is that uh the electronic data transmissions that go from like the cash register to the shelves, there was all kinds of problems that went on that even the consumer didn't even hear about. But the stores had not seen the volume ever, right? And that I know of, as long as data has been in place. I mean, March and April for stores was just chaos. And and so we knew it. We knew that there was like a problem, because we knew we had stock in the warehouses, but it wasn't making it to the shelf because it wasn't, creating an order that we were getting. And so we immediately saw that there was a problem, even when the buyers weren't admitting it to us. And so we would call up the buyers and say, hey, we have product in the warehouse. Can we bypass this distribution center and just send a truckload in? And like 50% of our buyers said, sure. Like, no, I'm like, you don't even have to explain what's going on.
Right.
I know what's going on. And again, I think sort of having that previous experience and data, I knew that we were making predictions and we were right. But I think that was, anyway, the net of it is that 2020 for us just really hockey sticked. I believe because we also had a direct to consumer business set up for the last 7 years. And, while we wanted to support stores and we did support stores, we also told the consumer, because we had that relationship with them, that they could just go online and order from us directly. And again, we had no idea kind of how long this thing would last and what ultimately would happen with stores, et cetera. But when consumers started trying, frankly, we had so much information, but nobody was kind of solving the problem for consumers. I believe consumers sat there and said, I got to stay healthy. I feel like in March, people were joking around on social media about, how many cocktails am I going to have tonight? I don't have to go into work tomorrow.
Quarantine in days. I remember seeing these memes coming through at day number 6. It's like, really? And now we're at day what?
Yeah. And they were saying like, like cookies and snacks, and people are talking about gaining weight. And then all of a sudden people are like, I got to get serious here about this thing. And I got to take care of myself. And I believe most people started, hiking and walking, and just to kind of get out of the house and get some normalcy. But with it, I think people got healthier, and people started figuring out that, they just don't want to get sick, and they want to keep their immune system up. And so who would have thunk that it would have taken a pandemic to kind of speed this up? I mean, you look at technology, even Zoom, that I believe that it was here, but the fact that people had to use it. And so again, I think that there's pieces of that where I certainly didn't expect. I wouldn't have said a huge, crisis like we've been in for 2020 would actually, take an industry by storm. But I have to believe that health is
Yeah.
such a top priority for people, and the companies, whether it's like a Peloton or, um, a water company
Well,
or
Pelotons are
things.
selling like hotcakes. It's the thing
Yeah.
I hear about on almost every Zoom call is,
Yeah. And
yeah,
especially if you have a way to go direct to consumer
right.
at home, that's a whole other piece.
Oh
Like if
yeah, because
you,
any company that's doing that now, I mean, we're all shopping online. Everybody has an app where I mean, after this, I'm sure at some point today I'll order food from somewhere that, doesn't go through a distributor. Yeah, it might be one of the food deliveries, but I know a lot of the restaurants are asking you not to use those in particular because it cuts out the middleman and the cost if you can just go right to the restaurant and they deliver, or you can do
yeah,
curbside pickup and things that are necessary now in 2020 will probably become the norm as we go forward, I would imagine.
yeah, totally.
So
And again, did I think that, back in
a year
15 years
ago
ago or
or
even a
even a year
year
ago.
ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, never would have thought about that. In fact, one thing that I frequently say to entrepreneurs, I, you know, hate to give away my secrets even before I talk to entrepreneurs, but I always laugh if there's a line in there when they're gonna like, sell the company for billions of dollars or,
Yeah.
because it's always like, oh, in a couple years, and it
Yeah.
all takes way longer, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen, that quickly. And again, I think that this is it's just a great example of, I've always learned. I would say I haven't always thought, but I've learned that things just take longer than
Yeah.
you ever think,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
right,
Like that
and
law of threes. It's going to take three times as long.
it will.
It's going to cost three times as much. You're going to make a third. I think that I've heard a lot, and I've shared this with a lot of my students. I get a chance to work with a lot of college students too. In strategic planning, we always talk about an exit strategy. When are you going to get
Hmm.
out of the business and so forth? One thing that I'm hearing people talk about now is what's your pandemic plan? Not that
Hmm.
we anticipate another pandemic, knock on wood, but I think we're all now thinking, I know you're thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. Everybody I talk to with the family businesses that I work with, it seems like it comes up a lot that, okay, next time there's something big like this, yeah, we've been through a recession, we've been through downtimes in the economy, but I think companies have to really be thinking in terms of when we have if we were to have a massive pandemic again, COVID 26, whatever we want to call it, and I don't want to make light of it by any stretch, hopefully we will be a little bit more prepared because I think what shocked me was 3 or 4 weeks into this how everybody was just hemorrhaging, how
Yeah.
quickly it hit so deep and so hard. And so I applaud you for the fact that you've had this hockey stick growth that you're talking about. You figured it out early. You figured out we got to get our product right to the consumer. I know you had hiccups, and I'm going to ask about that in a
Yeah.
second, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say we did have hiccups, but I was really proud of my team as a whole. And I can't even say that, I or any of them would say like we did things because we were planning for a pandemic, but
Right.
things like, because our product doesn't have preservatives in it, we we've always filled our room or filled our bottles in a very enclosed room that has very few people in it.
Yeah.
And our chief operating officer, who happens to be my husband as
Nice.
well, has always been saying for years, he said, the ultimate goal is to get everybody out of the room and have the entire process when we fill the bottle be automated, because we don't use preservatives. If there's any, if somebody has a little bit of a cold or if they haven't,
Yeah.
whatever, something can come in and and grow mold
Sure.
and we're always testing. We're huge filtrations,
Yeah.
pasteurization,
Anything can
all these things,
contaminate it, ruins it. So yeah, you have to make
anything.
sure.
And
Yeah.
so, we got down to a point by last summer where it was like one person was in the room. And so it was like, he's like, nope, we're
We're
going
almost
for
there.
zero.
Yeah.
We're almost there.
Yeah.
And we were like, okay, come on. Like this is really tough. And then we finally got to that point where there's no people in the room when we're filling the product by the end of 2019 in December. So when this pandemic hit, and we're actually regulated by the FDA because we use real fruit,
Yeah.
And unlike other beverage company or other water companies, I should say, because that's regulated by the state. And if you're not using fruit in your product, then you're just
Yeah.
regulated by the state and you don't have
Sure.
FDA. So when the FDA started looking around for potential COVID problems in March, they they went in and out of our plant because they were like, there's no people in
Yeah.
the room. So this doesn't make, there's other people. There's
Yeah, they're like, where's all the people?
chicken
They're walking around going,
chicken
who's going to run this
producers
machine?
and yeah,
Yeah.
and everybody else. But I think that just that spoke to the fact that we didn't have any hiccups in our manufacturing
Yeah.
or in our supply chain. And so ultimately we were able to really grow this business the way that we wanted. We were already expecting a big year for 2020. We were bringing on Walmart and Sam's Club and Aldi and some massive retailers. But then we were able to, really grow the e-commerce. We had a huge business, huge for us. It was like 15% of our overall business was food service. So corporate
Right.
food service, like the Googles and the Facebooks. And obviously that business,
Hmm.
they all closed down when offices closed down. But we immediately uh, just looked at sort of what we could control. And that was our direct to consumer business. And we said the retailers, that business, it's going to be what it's going to be. It's got issues that are going on. We'll do our best to, support and do what we can to solve these problems. But let's just focus on throwing the gas on our direct to consumer business. So that we were able to do,
Yeah.
right away. And but then in April, I think mid-April, we got a phone call from Costco. This was really interesting. Another one that we didn't predict at all, but they said, "Hey, we're really having a hard time is a lot of these beverage companies actually get their cans from Asia because the majority of aluminum actually comes from Asia. And so we don't use aluminum for other reasons,
Mhm.
but basically they just weren't getting their shipments. And so they said, we heard you do everything in the US. And just to sort of give people a little bit of glimpse, in case you
Sure.
forget, like these factories in other parts of the world were shutting down at different times. And so and earlier than the US. And so those shipments weren't going out the door.
Right.
And so that really affected US companies who
Yeah.
were
So now there's an
importing.
opportunity for you because you can get
So it was
product faster and
yeah. And so because we were ready to go, and I can't say that it wasn't stressful on our
sure.
team and our manufacturing, but we said, okay, well, Costco wants us, they want to take us nationwide in June, which is really unusual. Usually you have to go out to all the different regions, and they just
Yeah.
said, we're going to like flip the switch. So we did. So we went nationwide with them in probably by the end of June, which was amazing. And yeah, so it was
You
super,
know,
super great.
yep. Necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly there was a need, and you've been able to respond to that. So kudos to you and your team for being able to do that. I know we don't have a ton of time together today, and we haven't even touched on the book yet. And I've got a million more questions, Kara,
Yeah.
that I could ask you. And I hope that we can do a part two at some point of this because
Yeah, for
I want
sure.
to die. You're the youngest of five. I'm the youngest of five. My wife is the youngest of five. There's dynamics there. I was on a workshop this morning where we talked about that a little bit. Um, so many places we could go. I love the story of your dad and your mom, and I love just a lot of your background, and you love people. One of the things that came up as I was reading your book that I learned about you is, like me, you're not afraid to talk to anybody and reach out to anybody. You
Hmm.
didn't know me from Adam. I reached out and here we are talking, and
Yeah.
you reached out to an exec at Coke, and you've reached out, as you talked about, to all these other folks. So I think there's some great lessons there for you, and we'll promote your book here momentarily. But um, I guess the question that pops up for me is the why. A lot of us have had the idea and the inspiration to start a company and didn't do it. A lot of us have had the thought of writing a book and didn't do it or haven't done it yet. You've done both. So
Hmm.
now let's go into Undaunted. I love the book. Anytime I interview anybody, I try to read their book if I can. I got yours a few weeks ago, and it didn't take me long to go right through it. So many nuggets in there. And if I had another 2 hours, I'd probably go page by page with you because there's so much cool stuff. And I hope everybody listening
Thank
and
you.
watching today will buy it, and we'll link to it so you can. So why the inspiration to write it, and just take us through a little bit about, when you had that prompting and followed it, and just anywhere you want to go with the book. It's just, I mean, there's so much to talk about in such
Yeah.
little time.
Yeah. So the book's called Undaunted: Overcoming Doubts and Doubters. And I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, but I'm also an accidental author,
There you
because
go.
I know a lot of people have being an author on their bucket list. Not
Right.
that there's anything wrong with it.
Mhm.
I didn't. And even though I was a journalism major and, worked in editorial roles, I just had no idea that this was ultimately what I was going to do. But 4 years ago, I was traveling a ton, not just for Hint, but also doing a lot of public speaking nationwide on everything from building my company to being a female entrepreneur. And oftentimes I would get these questions from the audience and almost statements about me like, um, of course, you've never had any failures. You're very resilient. You are super confident. And I think one day, a couple of years ago, I sort of, thought, gosh, is that what I look like? Do I look like I haven't really, had doubts or stories of doubters,
No one's
that
following you at 3
crop
a.m.
up?
when you wake up in a cold
Right.
sweat, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And, so many things, everything from, again, being totally knowing what I was doing in tech to knowing nothing, and waking up and sort of leading with the, you can't make this up every single day. And it was almost like, I just felt like there was just this misunderstanding about me, but also misunderstanding maybe about a lot of entrepreneurs that I had met along the way too. And so, but through this journal, I would continue writing other stories, probably because I would get bored with like one story that I had, because I had so many, and
Sure.
I'd keep thinking like, oh, why did you think that you could risk things to go do it? And I would just start writing. I would almost give myself prompts to do that. And then about a year and a half ago, I knew a handful of authors, and I just started kind of networking with them and saying, listen, I've got this, group of notes about 600 pages, and I'm thinking about putting it into some kind of format. So, because I think it'll help a lot of people,
Yeah.
because I would also do these talks, and then people would reach out to me on email or LinkedIn or whatever and say, wow, you really helped me to see things just by telling your story.
Right.
And so I think like that. So at that point, I had decided, okay, I'm going to do it. I wasn't calling myself an author though. And then I went and, found a publisher, and I think that the hardest thing about actually publishing the book for me was very similar to how I launched this company. I did it a different way. I had no,
Mhm.
I didn't know, I didn't write an outline. I had all these pages already written. And so, I mean, that's really unusual. But in many ways, it was good, because I could actually, oftentimes, I guess, when you go and take a book in to be published, they, they sort of say, we want to turn it this way, or we want
Yeah.
you to go in this direction. My direction was, here it is,
It's done.
this is,
Yeah. It's
it's
almost
done.
done with
This
a little
is,
bit of work. Yeah.
yeah. And so the editing it down. So there were
Hmm.
so many stories
How do
that
you turn
had to get,
600 pages into
yeah, had to
220 or
get
so?
cut.
Yeah.
And so I had to cut a ton of stories. So sometimes, I've shared so many stories
Yeah.
that weren't in the book that were cut, or else I've got another book.
We get another book.
One
Yeah.
of
You
the
got
share.
part two.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I've got
Leave them
part
wanting
two
more,
of
right?
it. But the key for me in ultimately wanting to do it, and frankly, I mean, just since I launched October 20th, I mean, I
Yeah.
would have written this book way sooner if I would have known that it would have helped lots of people. I mean, here I am for the last 15 years, loving what I'm doing, because I'm actually helping people to get healthier.
Hmm.
In so many ways, the book is actually helping people to go do what they want to do. Call it passion, call it purpose, whatever. Just get out of the gate
Yeah.
and sort of, and kind of look at things like, it's okay to fear. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to fail. It's okay to have doubts. We all do. And I think it's also kind of bringing up this other topic that frankly I had never really thought about. I certainly heard it when I would be out speaking, but authentic leadership. And I think coming off of 2020,
Right.
uh, I think it's so key that people are really responding to me as saying, gosh, you're, showing all your warts and all, like you're really,
Yeah.
saying that you've got the successful company, but it wasn't always easy. And I really think that there's a lot of leaders that have the exact same challenges, and the ones that are really magnetic and that people ultimately want to follow and employees want to work at those companies
Yep.
are, you have to have a great product or service, but assuming you've got all that, the rest of this I think is really key. And I think what's probably the hardest thing, frankly, is that I think people want to be themselves. I don't think
Sure.
people want, but you start, it's almost like you've got to get out of the habit
Yeah.
of being this, if you're not currently living authentically.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
then
Well,
you've
yeah. And
got to get out of the habit, and it's
yeah.
hard.
And I gravitate towards the people that I like. I mean, I love your product, and I've gotten to know you, and I really enjoy our interaction that we've had prior to
Yeah.
today. Firing you a text message on Thanksgiving, hey, we're all drinking hit water, and you respond. And
Yeah.
then, the coffee I drink, the beverages, the food, it's the people. And I think that
Yeah.
more now than ever we do. You're spot on, in my opinion, is that we want to latch on to authentic people that we love, that we trust. I mean, if I really like someone's product, but the guy in charge of it was just a jerk, I probably wouldn't drink the product or eat
Yeah.
it or what have you. I would go with the people. There's so many options out there that we
Yeah.
need to make sure that, the
Well,
story
access to
behind the story.
information
Yeah, exactly. With social
is,
media and
yeah,
everything else. Yeah.
100%. And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
And and I mean, it's a necessity that is really, I mean, I don't know. Like I've had people say to me, how did you make the decision to actually start, sharing your story? And I'm like, we didn't have any money to,
Hmm.
like, I mean, I would share my stories because I would go into buyers and try and convince them to put a new category on the shelf, and they'd say, why? And
Yeah.
I'd say, well, I'll tell you why. And I'd share that story. But now it's like the only brands that'll be successful are the ones that, tell stories.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I'm
that's,
in,
yeah. Yeah.
that's what, but anyway,
Well,
it's an
that's the thing. We
interesting,
we latch on to stories. We learn the most great leaders tell great stories. I've used those words on this podcast before and in a lot of conversations. And I have the honor of talking to great leaders every day, not just on the podcast, but in the work that I do with family companies and entrepreneurs around the world. And ultimately, the ones that I remember are the ones that have that great story, and they are just real.
mm-hmm,
People, as I say in air quotes here for those that are just listening, those who get it. And
mm-hmm.
you can tell when someone gets it and someone doesn't get it. So, I mean, we have a couple of minutes, and I know you have another thing here in a few minutes, as do I. But I want to get a couple of questions out there for you, if I could. We'll finish with a couple of things, how to get your book and how to reach you, and we'll do that in a second. But can you talk about one doubt that stands out to you that you've overcome? I mean, the title of the book, Overcoming Doubts and Doubters, a doubt that you've had that you've overcome that might inspire someone listening today.
Yeah, I think maybe, gosh, so many doubts along the
Sure.
way, but I think probably just actually launching a company. I mean, that to me 15 years ago would have seemed daunting. Like
Hmm.
and again, how you overcome that ultimately, and how I overcame it was I just said, I'm just going to launch a product on the shelf at Whole Foods. Made it seem almost much more containable and doable versus actually going down the road
Sure.
and to say, oh, I'm going to go launch a company.
I
It's
mean, to be
just
in all
like,
50 states and crossing borders and everything else now.
and
Sure.
taking on, the big soda giants, all the
Mhm.
things that people use today to sort of describe Hint and me and everything else. I think that the way that I was able to ultimately go out and do it and sort of manage that doubt, and I certainly had them, and it is really just to kind of tackle it by actually making it smaller in your mind.
Mm.
I'm just going to go
Yeah.
get in my car, go down the street and see what it's going to take. And
Yeah.
the other thing about doing that too is that you see that you start to make progress when you break it down and you've got, little wins along the way. Okay, I found the right guy at Whole Foods to, you know, go bother about
Hmm.
me launching this product. And then I, made a few phone calls. Like it's another thing that I often share with people too that I feel are getting overwhelmed is that these don't give yourself too big of a list, right, to do.
Yeah.
Just have these little wins along the way. And even if you've gotten all those things done, the couple of things that you needed to get done today, maybe you continue to just do those things that aren't on the list,
Yeah.
right? And go, and then you're like, oh, I actually got a lot of those things done. Because if you feel like you're accomplishing stuff along the way, that you'll ultimately do a lot more and you'll be more excited and all of that going along with it.
So I'm having an aha right now, and maybe I'm the only one, but I doubt it. But the aha I'm having is I tend to think big because I've always been told, think big, think about all the
Mm-hmm.
things you can do in this grandiose organization and this impact you can make around the world. And yeah, those are great things to be thinking about. What I'm hearing you say, at least the words that I'm interpreting from your
Yeah.
mouth through the airwaves to my heart, is think little. Think about just getting your product on that one shelf at that one store in San Francisco, or think about that one person who might read my book, or think about the person who might buy the t-shirts that I'm making in my garage, rather than it turning into this $1 billion company or this $150 million beverage company.
Yeah.
Think little, think a step at a time. I think we get overwhelmed. I do.
Yeah.
I get
No,
overwhelmed when I
totally.
think big.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
so thank you. Thanks
Yeah,
for that. Yeah,
no, definitely. And I think it's an important, it's an important piece for people to think about because I do think that it's, you know, you've got to think big, but I also think that the most successful entrepreneurs, they might think big, but they don't know how to, or I should say that the least successful entrepreneurs are the ones that might think big, but they don't know how to execute,
yeah,
right? They don't know how to, and that's why I always share with people that, there's ideas are a dime a dozen,
sure.
but the actual execution, the somebody who can actually have the vision, but actually figure out how to execute it or build a team to execute it is that's a successful entrepreneur. And so in order to do that, you've really got to be able to take these little steps along the way. That doesn't go
Sure.
with maybe eventually you'll get to having that big idea,
Sure.
but you've got to have these little wins along the way and little steps that actually happen in order to make that happen.
Is there a mentor out there that you still, I know you've talked about some before, and there's some in your book, but are there mentors that today you would pick up the phone and call today and say, hey, I'm in a rut or I'm in a situation. Can we chat? Somebody famous or not famous that you lean on a lot?
Know about lean on a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that that's it. I get so much inspiration from reading. I'm
Sure.
constantly reading and listening to books as well as podcasts. And yeah, I'm constantly like reading about these people, and that's where I gain tons of inspiration. Different. I also feel like no one mentor is going to kind of give you everything you
There's so
need.
many
I
different
mean,
parts of life. Sure.
yeah, I mean, there's many of the people who are on my book have been people that have kind of played a part in my
Yeah.
life and I've admired, but I always laugh because people are like, "Do you meet with them monthly or weekly?" And
Yeah.
and
John Legend. Are you guys like hanging out
yeah,
together and
well,
stuff? Yeah. So,
John's an investor in our company,
right.
and actually I owe him an email about something, but
Nice.
but
Tell him that I really love this song with Carrie Underwood. I've been listening to it over and over. Hallelujah,
it
by
is
the
a
way.
good
Yeah, it's
song, right?
awesome. Yeah.
Um, but I think that, the thing about like Jamie Dimon, for
Hmm.
example, I had met him at a dinner. I didn't even know who he was. And we ended up talking. He is a cancer survivor. And we ended up talking about cancer and health. And
Yeah.
I wasn't talking to him about finance, but when I ultimately learned sort of by accident who he was when he handed me his business card after I was talking about Hint, and he had never heard about it. And he said, I'd love to try it. It seems like everybody at dinner really likes it a lot.
Mm.
And I sent it to him, and he hands me his business card. Then reached back out to me after he tried it. He said, "This is really great. I think it's great that you're really focused on health." And
Mhm.
because again, health was so important
What the
to
start of it
him,
was too.
right
Yeah.
after going through cancer.
Right.
And he was, it was personal. And for him, he thought what I was talking about around, sugar feeding into cancers,
Yeah.
and not really understanding how your body reacts to different things that you put into it and all that. I mean, it just made sense to him. And so now, I mean, as we started to go through different financings, he's been enormously helpful on just like, I mean, the guy probably runs somewhere the world economy, and he's
Exactly.
talking to
Yeah.
me about like, should I do debt, should I do, how
Mm.
should I think about this overall? And I would say he's been a mentor, but I also share with people that I'm really careful about using people's time, right?
Sure.
And I think
Absolutely.
that you have to really understand what questions you have, because I think like that is something that the people that really you want their advice, they just don't have time most of the
Yeah.
time, right? And so
Yeah.
you have to really figure out, what you really want out of them. And but yeah.
So, no pun intended or some, I can take a hint, by the way, that you're hinting that our time is up. So I'm eating up your time. But no, this has been great. There's so many places that we could still go. And genuinely, I do hope that we can talk again
Yeah,
on the
that sounds
podcast and also
terrific.
just socially. I really enjoy your story. I love your book. I love what you're doing. You're an inspiration to me, and I know you're inspiring a lot of others all over the world with your podcast, the Kara Goldin Show, which I know you have like 105 guests or something like that now. And I'm coming
It's
up on
getting there.
50 on mine, and I've been inspired by the guests and you as I listen, and certainly your book. And like I said, we're loyal Hint drinkers now in the Hart household, and we'll continue to not only promote and drink it, but tell everybody about it. What's the best way
Awesome.
for my audience to reach you?
Probably just on social. It's Kara Goldin with an I, and I'm all over all social channels. So definitely let me know what you think. Hopefully, you'll get a chance to read the book,
Yeah.
and I'd be delighted to meet you.
I love that, and I will put a link on the show notes here to the book and to your show and all the other ways that people can reach you. So, I prepared you for this last question. As you know, the name of the show is From the Heart, and so the final question I ask all of my guests is simply, Kara Goldin, what's in your heart?
My heart is to go out and live this life with a heart of trying, somebody that goes and tries and is open to experiences, and just doing the best I can.